I woke from a 5-year coma to find my house empty and my husband's diary hidden in the ceiling. What I read inside made me wish I'd never opened it. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw wasn't a hospital ceiling. It was my own. Or at least it should have been. I knew the pattern of our bedroom ceiling, the faint hairline crack that ran diagonally like a pale scar, the water stain from that storm in '98. But this was different. A narrow rectangle in the wood had been pried open, as if someone had reached up and disturbed the bones of the house. Inside the opening, wedged between beams, was a book. No, not a book. A diary. The leather cover was cracked and dry, the way old hands look in winter, and it was open, lying there like it had been waiting for me. I didn't move right away. My body felt foreign, heavy, as though it belonged to someone else. My legs tingled, my arms ached in a deep, unreachable way. I could smell dust and something faintly metallic. My mouth was so dry it hurt to swallow. I sat up slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. The bed was mine, but the sheets were stiff and smelled of neglect, like they'd been washed and left to sit too long in a damp closet. The nightstand held no lamp, no clock, just a thin film of dust and a single glass of water. The last thing I remembered was Dr. Nathaniel Cross standing by the bed, jotting something down in his little notebook while I drifted into a darkness I couldn't fight. That had been years ago? Days? My mind was a broken calendar, pages missing. But that diary, it was balanced so precariously in that ceiling gap, open as though someone had been interrupted mid-sentence. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my feet touching the cold floorboards, and reached for the little step stool that used to sit under my sewing table. My knees wobbled like they'd forgotten their job, but I dragged the stool over and climbed, one shaky step at a time. When my fingers brushed the leather, a shiver ran through me. I pulled it down, a puff of dust clouding the air. The weight of it was strange, heavier than I expected. The pages were thick, filled edge to edge with Dr. Nathaniel Cross's sharp, meticulous handwriting. That was his hand without a doubt. The first page I saw was dated only 6 months before. Something. There was no year, only his own cryptic numbering system. Cycle 27, Phase 3. Under it, a line. Subject E1 shows increased tolerance to compound after 14-day exposure. Cardiac response stable. Subject E2 exhibits early signs of neurological adaptation. Subject E1. Subject E2. The letters thudded in my skull like a drumbeat. My initials. My son's. I snapped the diary shut. My breath had gone shallow. The room seemed smaller now, the shadows thicker. I listened for sounds, the hum of the fridge downstairs, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the muffled rhythm of Dr. Nathaniel Cross pacing in his study. But there was nothing. No clock ticking, no car in the drive. No Dr. Nathaniel Cross. No Samuel. My hand clenched around the diary. I should have been relieved. 5 years, I didn't know it yet, but that's how long I'd been gone. And the man who'd kept me in that twilight between waking and death was nowhere in sight. But relief was tangled up in dread. If Dr. Nathaniel Cross wasn't here, where was he? And why leave this behind? His precious notes, his record of whatever it was he'd been doing to us. I set the diary on my lap and opened it again, this time slower. The handwriting was clinical, almost detached, but the words it described were not. Measurements. Dosages. Changes in skin tone, hair texture, reflex speed. My name replaced by a code, my body reduced to numbers. There was no warmth in his observations. Not the warmth of a husband watching over his wife's health. This was a scientist cataloging a specimen. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely turn the page. I stopped myself before I read too far. Not yet. Not until I knew where I was standing, in my own home, or in some sort of lab disguised as one. I closed the diary again and hugged it to my chest like a shield. My heart was pounding. Not just from the effort of moving but from something deeper. The knowledge that I'd stumbled into the middle of a story that had been going on without me. The air in the room felt stale and used. I could see a faint film of dust on the dresser, the outlines where picture frames used to stand. My wedding ring, I realized suddenly, was gone. The indent was still there on my finger, pale against my skin, but the ring itself had vanished. I slid off the stool, my knees buckling slightly. I pressed the diary flat against my palm, its edges digging into my skin. I didn't trust myself to leave it behind, even for a moment. Somewhere deep down, I knew that whatever answers I was going to find about my missing years, about Dr. Nathaniel Cross, about Samuel, were pressed between those pages. But right then I also knew I wasn't ready to face all of them at once. Not without seeing the rest of the house first. Still, I couldn't resist glancing at one last line before I left the room. Near the back of the diary, in Dr. Nathaniel Cross's neat, looping hand, E1 long-term effects promising. Recommend continuation upon return. Continuation. Upon return. I didn't know if that meant he was coming back for me, or that he never expected me to be awake when he did. I pressed my lips together, took a deep breath, and stepped into the hallway. The diary heavy in my hands, the house silent as a tomb. The hallway smelled wrong. It wasn't the warm mix of lemon polish and cinnamon I used to keep in the air, nor the faint scent of Dr. Nathaniel Cross's cologne that used to linger when he passed. No, this was the smell of something left too long in the dark. Dust. Dampness. A hint of rot. I held the diary tight against my chest and shuffled toward the stairs, my feet bare, the boards cool under them. My legs felt unsteady, but I refused to sit down again. I'd been still for far too long. The banister was gritty when I touched it, like no one had wiped it in years. As I descended, the first thing I noticed was the light, or rather, the lack of it. Curtains were half drawn, blocking the sun. Where it did slip through, it caught floating dust motes in its beams, making the air look thick enough to drink. The living room was my first stop. I stood in the doorway, letting my eyes travel over the space I'd known for decades. My blue armchair was gone. The rug, the one Samuel and I picked out when he was 12, had been rolled away, leaving pale rectangles in the carpet where the sun hadn't touched. The photographs were the hardest to take in. Once every shelf and wall had held a frame. Our wedding day, Samuel's first steps, summers at the lake. Now the walls were bare. A few lone nails stuck out like splinters. I moved on. In the kitchen, the air was heavier, carrying a sour edge that made me breathe through my mouth. The fridge hummed softly, but when I opened it, the stench hit me like a wave. Milk had curdled in a glass bottle, and something once green now sagged in a crumpled plastic bag. Eggs, long past saving, had collapsed in their carton. I shut the door quickly, my stomach turning. The counters were coated in dust. A single mug sat beside the sink, crusted with the remains of what might have been coffee. It wasn't mine. I'd never owned a mug with the name Nathaniel Cross printed in bold blue letters. He hated anything kitschy, as he called it. This must have been new. Or perhaps not so new anymore. A soft thud from upstairs made me freeze. My grip on the diary tightened until my knuckles ached. I waited, listening. Nothing followed, no footsteps, no voices. I told myself it was the house settling, but my pulse didn't slow. I made my way down the hall toward Samuel's room. The door was ajar, the air inside cooler. I pushed it open gently. Empty. His bed frame was there, but the mattress was gone. The desk where he used to do his homework sat bare except for a single deep scratch in the surface. I remembered that one. He'd made it carving his initials when he was 13. The letters D.M. stared back at me, lonely and small in all that emptiness. In the corner, a cardboard box sat half-crushed. I knelt slowly, prying it open. Inside were a few of his old things, a baseball glove, a tattered copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and a photograph. I lifted it carefully. Samuel, maybe 16, smiling at the camera with one arm slung around me. Dr. Nathaniel Cross must have taken the picture. It was the last summer before everything began to shift. I slipped the photo between the pages of the diary. My head felt thick with questions. Where was Samuel? Why strip the house bare of any sign of him, of us? And why leave me here alone to wake up to this? As I stood, my knees cracked in protest. I took one more look around his room, then closed the door. In the study, Dr. Nathaniel Cross's sanctuary, I expected to find some sign of him. His shelves were still lined with books, most on botany, chemistry, human physiology. But where his desk once held neat stacks of papers, there was only dust. A single drawer hung open, empty. In the far corner, I noticed a square in the carpet slightly darker than the rest, as if something heavy had sat there for years and been removed. It was then, standing in that stale room with the diary's weight growing heavier in my arms, that my mind began to pull at threads I'd been avoiding. The last night I remembered before the coma, the supplements, his notes, the dizziness started to unspool in my head. Pushed it back down. Not yet. The sun was lowering when I finally made my way to the front door. The glass panel in it was streaked with grime, and beyond, the driveway sat empty. No car. No signs of recent use. The mailbox leaned slightly, the paint peeling. A small pile of unopened envelopes lay on the entryway floor, pushed through the slot and left to gather dust. I bent to pick them up. Most were addressed to Dr. Nathaniel Cross, letters from scientific journals, a bill or two. But one caught my eye. My name. In Samuel's handwriting. The envelope was unopened. My hand shook as I tore it. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Things here aren't right. I'm trying to find a way to help you, but it's harder than I thought. Please hold on. I'll come back for you. There was no date. No return address. Only his name scrawled at the bottom. I stood there for a long time, the diary in one hand, the letter in the other, the house silent around me. My memories were still scattered, but one thing had settled in clear as glass. Whatever had happened to me hadn't been an accident. And the man who'd promised to love and protect me had been preparing for my absence long before I slipped into darkness. I was 30 the summer I met Dr. Bennett, and I thought I had my life all mapped out. Not in the grand way young people do, dreaming of castles and riches, but in the way a sensible woman does. Steady job at the library, small apartment above a bakery, Sunday dinners with my parents, the occasional trip to the coast with friends. I'd been in love once long ago, and after that ended I decided I'd be content without a husband. Dr. Nathaniel Cross changed that in an afternoon. It was a county fair, of all places. My friend Louise Harper dragged me along, swearing I needed to get some sun, and maybe meet a nice man. I wasn't interested, but I let her talk me into the lemonade stand competition. That's where I saw him, standing just outside the judging tent, tall and neatly dressed, a notebook in hand. He was watching the contest with the sort of focus most men reserved for ball games. When our eyes met, he smiled. Not the quick, shy smile of a man caught staring, but something deliberate, assessing. He stepped forward, extended a hand and said, "Dr. Bennett, I'm doing a study on locally sourced produce. May I ask you a few questions about your lemonade recipe?" I laughed, a little flustered. "It's just lemons and sugar, Mr. Maxwell. Nothing scientific about it." He chuckled, but his eyes stayed sharp. "Everything is scientific, Mrs. Miss," I corrected. "Clara Bennett." He wrote my name in his notebook as though it belonged in a record. From that day on, he had a way of appearing wherever I was, the library, the bakery, the post office. Always with a question, always with that same watchful interest. He told me he was a botanist and human physiologist, working on studies that combine plant compounds with human health. His work, he said, could change lives. When he asked me to dinner, I said yes. I'd never met a man so precise. Dr. Nathaniel Cross spoke in measured sentences, never rushing a word. He didn't drink much, didn't waste time on gossip, and listened with an intensity that made me feel as though every thought I had was important. He asked about my health, my habits, even my family's medical history, not in a nosy way but with genuine curiosity. "You're in remarkable condition," he said one evening, after I told him I rarely got sick. "Good genetics, strong constitution. That's rare." I remember thinking it was an odd thing to say, but I took it as a compliment. We married the following spring. The wedding was small, my parents, a few friends, no fuss. Dr. Nathaniel Cross didn't believe in wasting money on ceremony. He'd already bought a house on the edge of town, a tidy place with a greenhouse in the backyard where he spent most of his days. At first, our life together felt idyllic. Dr. Nathaniel Cross rose early, made breakfast with military precision, and left me little notes with reminders about vitamins or walks in the fresh air. He cooked on weekends, served elaborate stews with herbs from his greenhouse. He was affectionate in his own way, a hand at the small of my back when we walked, a kiss on the crown of my head when I read in the parlor. But there was a formality to it, like everything had been scheduled. And there were the checkups. Once a month, Dr. Nathaniel Cross would ask me to sit in his study so he could track my health. He'd weigh me, check my pulse, take small vials of blood. He kept a thick ledger of numbers, graphs, and notes written in his precise script. I teased him about being my personal doctor, but he only smiled and said, "It's important to keep a record." He introduced small changes into our meals, different teas, unusual vegetables, powders stirred into my morning oatmeal. When I asked, he'd say they were natural supplements from his research. I didn't question it. I trusted him. Looking back now, I see the early signs. The way he discouraged me from seeing a regular physician. The way he insisted on making all our meals, even when I offered to cook. The way he took notes on me as if I were another plant in his greenhouse. But at the time I thought I was just lucky. Lucky to have a husband who cared so much about my well-being, who was building a future where his work might help others. That first year was filled with quiet evenings, dinner parties with a few of his colleagues, and weekends in the greenhouse. Dr. Nathaniel Cross would explain the properties of each plant, how foxglove could affect the heart, how certain roots could ease pain or sharpen the mind. I'd listen, fascinated, never imagining those same plants might one day be used on me in ways I hadn't agreed to. One night, about a year into our marriage, I woke to find him sitting at my bedside, notebook in hand. He said he was just making observations, because I'd been breathing irregularly in my sleep. He smoothed my hair back and told me to rest. I thought nothing of it then. Now, with the diary heavy in my hands and the house stripped bare, that memory chills me. As I realize he wasn't just watching me that night. He was studying me. And it was only the beginning. Samuel was born on a crisp October morning. The kind where the air feels sharper than glass and every breath tastes clean. I remember holding him for the first time. His little face scrunched like he'd just been handed the wrong order. He was perfect. Dark hair like mine, eyes so deep and curious I swore he was studying me right back. Dr. Nathaniel Cross, standing beside the bed, didn't cry. I didn't expect him to. He wasn't that kind of man. But I thought I saw something in his eyes, something that flickered between pride and calculation. He reached out, touched Samuel's tiny fist and said, "Strong grip. Good reflexes." It was the same tone he used when examining a plant in the greenhouse. I laughed it off. New fathers say all kinds of odd things in the delivery room. But from the moment we brought Samuel home, Dr. Nathaniel Cross took charge of his care in a way that was unusual. He had a feeding chart taped above the crib, with precise times for every bottle. He measured Samuel's weight daily, noting it down in a separate ledger from mine. First, I told myself it was just the way Dr. Nathaniel Cross showed love, through data, through order. But soon the tests began. When Samuel was only a few months old, Dr. Nathaniel Cross started hanging colored shapes above his crib, not for decoration but as part of a visual stimulation sequence. He'd watch closely to see which ones caught Samuel's gaze the longest, jotting down the results. As Samuel grew, the games became more structured. He'd have him crawl towards certain objects, time how long it took him to grab them. When Samuel was 2, Dr. Nathaniel Cross began giving him special snacks, small biscuits made from his own blend of herbs and powders. "They're just healthy," Dr. Nathaniel Cross told me when I hesitated. "Better than all that sugar and store-bought cookies." I tasted one once. Bitter, almost metallic. "Acquired taste," Dr. Nathaniel Cross said with a smile. "Children adapt quickly." And Samuel did adapt. He ate whatever was given to him, ran the obstacle courses. Dr. Nathaniel Cross sat up in the backyard and sat still while his father shone lights in his eyes or tapped his knees with a reflex hammer. I tried to balance things out, taking him to the park, letting him play in the dirt, read storybooks under a blanket fort. But even then, Dr. Nathaniel Cross was never far away, notebook in hand, observing. When Samuel was about 7, Dr. Nathaniel Cross started taking him on weekend research trips. They'd pack up early Saturday morning, come back late Sunday night. Dr. Nathaniel Cross said they were visiting remote labs, seeing the work firsthand. I asked once if I could come along. "It's not suitable for you, Clara," he said, almost absently. "Samuel's young. His body is adaptable. You wouldn't tolerate the conditions as well." That answer should have chilled me. But I was tired from managing the house, tired from Dr. Nathaniel Cross's constant schedules, tired from the quiet way he made me feel that my questions were a nuisance. So I didn't press. But Samuel began to change. Not in the obvious ways. He was still my sweet boy, still hugged me before bed, still asked for my pancakes on Sunday mornings. But he grew quieter about the trips. If I asked what they'd done, he'd shrug and say, "Just help Dad." Sometimes I'd notice small bruises on his arms or a scratch along his jaw. He'd brush them off as accidents. One night, when he was about 10, I found him awake long past bedtime, sitting on the floor of his room with his knees pulled up. I sat beside him and asked what was wrong. He wouldn't look at me. "Do you ever feel like," he hesitated, "like you're not just you? Like someone's trying to make you into something else?" My heart squeezed. I asked him what he meant, but he shook his head. "Forget it, Mom. I'm just tired." I wanted to push, but Dr. Nathaniel Cross's footsteps sounded in the hallway. Samuel scrambled into bed, pulled the covers over his head. Dr. Nathaniel Cross looked in, smiled faintly at the sight of his son pretending to sleep, and closed the door. By then, I'd begun to notice my own health slipping. Little things at first: headaches, dizziness, a bone-deep fatigue I couldn't shake. Dr. Nathaniel Cross always had an explanation. "Seasonal changes," he'd say. "Dehydration. Low iron." He'd mix me a drink from his greenhouse stores, stand by while I swallowed it, and then jot something down in his ledger. I told myself it was all in service of his work, that he was simply devoted. But in quiet moments, when Samuel's eyes met mine across the dinner table, I saw the same unease I felt. And I began to wonder if Dr. Nathaniel Cross's devotion wasn't to us at all, but to whatever experiment we'd unknowingly become a part of. The first time I fainted, I told myself it was nothing. It was a Sunday afternoon and Samuel and I were baking oatmeal cookies. I bent to take the tray out of the oven, and the next thing I knew, I was on the kitchen floor with Samuel's hands on my shoulder and Dr. Nathaniel Cross kneeling beside me, cool as ever. "You're dehydrated," he said, offering me a glass of water. "Stand up slowly. Don't make a fuss." I didn't make a fuss, but I noticed he didn't look surprised. After that, it happened again, once while hanging laundry, once in the middle of reading Samuel a bedtime story. Always the same recovery. Dr. Nathaniel Cross with a drink ready, his eyes steady on mine as though I were part of a test he'd been running. The fatigue worsened. Some mornings I couldn't lift my head from the pillow. My joints ached like I was twice my age. I asked Dr. Nathaniel Cross to take me to a doctor. He shook his head. Doctors don't understand your constitution like I do. They'd fill you with chemicals and undo years of careful work. Trust me, Clara, I'll get you back to strength. Careful work? I asked. He just smiled, patted my hand, and went to the greenhouse. Samuel had been quieter too. Not the sulking of adolescence, but something tighter, watchful. One evening after Dr. Nathaniel Cross went to his study, Samuel knocked on my bedroom door and slipped inside. "Mom," he whispered, glancing toward the hall. "Does Dad ever take your blood?" The question startled me, but I nodded. "Sometimes. Just for tests." His mouth twisted. "He does it to me, too. Says it's for vitamins, but..." He stopped, chewing on the inside of his cheek. "It doesn't feel like it." I sat up straighter. "Samuel, has he hurt you?" He shook his head quickly. "No, not like that. But I think..." He broke off as we heard Dr. Nathaniel Cross's footsteps on the stairs. Samuel slipped back into the hallway before the door opened. "Dear." Nathaniel Cross came in holding a glass of cloudy liquid. "Drink," he said. "What is it?" "Restorative blend," he replied, as if that explained everything. It tasted bitter, the same metallic tang I remembered from Samuel's biscuits. My stomach turned, but Dr. Nathaniel Cross's gaze didn't leave mine until the last drop was gone. Then he made a note in the small pad he always carried, nodded once, and left. From then on, the restoratives became part of my daily routine, and Samuel's. "Dear." Nathaniel Cross insisted we take them in front of him. If I hesitated, he'd sigh, reminding me how fragile my health was becoming. Meals changed too. Gone were the hearty soups and stews. Instead, we had broth so thin I could see the bottom of the bowl. Salads dotted with unfamiliar leaves from his greenhouse, powders stirred into every drink. He measured our portions carefully, wrote down what we ate, and sometimes took our pulse afterward. I started keeping a secret stash of crackers in my dresser drawer. Samuel found them once when he came in to talk. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked. "Feel what?" "Like we're not living here," he said. "Just staying here until he's done with us." The words settled heavy between us. I didn't answer, but in my gut I knew he was right. Soon Dr. Nathaniel Cross stopped letting us leave the property without him. He said my health couldn't take the strain, and Samuel's studies needed more focus. Trips to the grocery store became rare. And when we went, Dr. Nathaniel Cross kept a hand on my elbow the whole time, steering me quickly through the aisles. Our phone calls to friends dwindled. He said outside contact was disruptive to the work. Work. Always that word. One night, I woke to find the lamp on and Dr. Nathaniel Cross sitting at the foot of the bed, watching me sleep. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice dry. "Monitoring your cycles," he said simply, jotting something in his notebook. I turned away, pretending to drift back to sleep, but my mind was a tangle of fear. Samuel stopped confiding in me after that. I think he didn't want to worry me, or maybe he was afraid Dr. Nathaniel Cross would find out. But I'd catch his eyes on me at dinner, a silent question passing between us. "Are you okay?" And my look back was always the same. "No, but I'm still here." I began to suspect that Dr. Nathaniel Cross's control wasn't just about the house, or the routines, or the food. It was about us, our bodies, our minds. And whatever experiment he thought he was running, he wasn't anywhere near finished. Looking back, I can see we were already caught in his design like insects in a jar. We could move, breathe, speak, but never leave. And I think even then he was already preparing for the moment he would tighten the lid. I remember the smell before I remember the fall. It was a sharp green scent, like crushed leaves, but with something bitter underneath. Dr. Nathaniel Cross had been in the greenhouse all day, and when he came in for supper, he carried that smell with him. Samuel was already at the table, quiet, his shoulders drawn in. Dr. Nathaniel Cross set down a small tray beside my plate. On it were 3 small vials filled with liquid the color of honey. "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "A new supplement blend," Dr. Nathaniel Cross said, uncorking the first vial. "You and Samuel will take one before dinner for the next 2 weeks. I've refined the formula. This should stabilize your immune system." "I thought you said I was already stable," I replied. He gave a thin smile. "We can always improve." Samuel's eyes flicked to mine, a silent warning. I wanted to push back to say no, but Dr. Nathaniel Cross's gaze was steady, patient, the same look he gave me when I first fainted in the kitchen. I knew that if I refused, the conversation would stretch for hours, and in the end I'd drink it anyway. So I tipped the vial to my lips. The liquid was thick, coating my tongue, leaving that same metallic tang I'd grown to dread. Dr. Nathaniel Cross handed Samuel his, and my son drank without a word. Dinner passed in a strange quiet. I noticed Dr. Nathaniel Cross barely touched his food, scribbling something in his notebook between bites. Samuel kept his head down, pushing his stew around the bowl. It was halfway through washing the dishes that the room tilted. My vision blurred at the edges, and the clink of a plate hitting the counter sounded far away, like it was happening underwater. "Clara!" Dr. Nathaniel Cross's voice came from somewhere behind me. "Calm. Too calm. I'm dizzy," I managed, gripping the edge of the sink. "Sit down," he said. His hand closed around my arm, guiding me to the chair. The floor felt soft under my feet, the air thick in my lungs. I could hear Samuel calling, "Mom? What's happening?" But his voice was muffled, fading. Dr. Nathaniel Cross knelt in front of me, his notebook open on the table beside us. "Describe what you're feeling," he said, his tone clinical. I can't." The words wouldn't form right. My tongue felt heavy. He wrote something down, then leaned closer. "Just breathe. This is part of the process." "The process?" I tried to lift my head to focus on Samuel, but my neck wouldn't cooperate. The last thing I saw before the darkness closed in was Dr. Nathaniel Cross's pen moving steadily across the page, recording whatever was happening to me as though I were no more than a subject in his lab. When I came to, I was in bed. The curtains were drawn tight, and the room smelled faintly of alcohol and dried herbs. My limbs felt like they'd been filled with sand. I turned my head slowly and saw Dr. Nathaniel Cross sitting in the chair by the window, watching me. "How long?" My voice cracked, barely a whisper. "Rest," he interrupted. "Your body is adapting. That's all you need to know." "Where's Samuel?" He paused, his pen hovering over the notebook. "He's fine. Focus on yourself." But I didn't see him. Not that day or the next. I called for him, but Dr. Nathaniel Cross always had the same answer. "He's resting." Or, "He's helping me with something important." Time began to blur. Sometimes I woke to see Dr. Nathaniel Cross at the bedside, checking my pulse, shining a small light into my eyes. Sometimes there was food, always bland, always with that faint aftertaste. Other times, I'd wake to nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the scratch of his pen in the corner. The days grew shorter in my memory, then longer until they stopped existing altogether. I'd drift into sleep and surface only to find hours, maybe days, had passed. I began to lose track of what was dream and what was real. Once, in a half-waking state, I thought I heard Samuel's voice, urgent, almost panicked, in the hallway. Dr. Nathaniel Cross's deeper tone answered, but I couldn't make out the words. Then footsteps moved away, and the house was silent again. There was one moment I'll never forget. Dr. Nathaniel Cross leaned over me, adjusted the blanket and whispered, You're holding up better than I'd hoped. This will take us so much further than I imagined. I wanted to ask what this was, but my mouth wouldn't open, my eyes wouldn't stay up. I slipped under again into that heavy, endless dark. And in that darkness, time folded in on itself. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that I'd stay there for 5 years. It took me hours after finding that diary in the ceiling to gather the courage to open it again. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of water I'd boiled, not because I wanted tea, but because the act of heating it made me feel like I had some control, however small. The diary lay in front of me, its cracked leather cover catching the dim afternoon light. When I finally opened it, the pages greeted me with Dr. Nathaniel Cross's neat, mechanical handwriting. Not a single blotch, not a single wasted word. The man had always been methodical, but here he was cold. Cycle 24, Phase 5, Subject, E1, showing expected muscle atrophy with minimal neurological decay. Notable resilience in immune markers despite prolonged sedation. Subject, E2, assisting in compound preparation. Behavioral compliance high. 1. That was me. Samuel. I turned the page. Cycle 25, Phase 1, introduced new extract to 1 via 4. Heart rate stabilized after initial spike. E2 present during administration. Instructed him on dosage calculation. He executed task without hesitation. My hands trembled. He'd involved Samuel in this? Not just as a bystander but as an assistant. The further I read, the more it became clear that my 5 missing years weren't years of sleep, but years of being kept on the edge, slipping in and out of consciousness while Dr. Nathaniel Cross tinkered with whatever formula he was chasing. There were entries describing my reactions to changes in diet, injections, controlled fevers. One entry chilled me to the bone. E1 demonstrated intermittent awareness during cycle 26, phase 4. Eyes opened briefly during nocturnal observation. No attempt at speech. Resumed sedation protocol to maintain consistency. I remembered nothing of this, but the idea that I might have woken, seen him leaning over me, and then been sent back under, it made me grip the table until my nails bit into the wood. Samuel's name appeared less often as the diary went on. At first, he was mentioned almost daily, assisting with preparation, recording temperature, collecting samples. But then the mentions thinned. Absent from procedure. Refused to assist. And finally simply, non-compliant. I swallowed hard and turned another page. The handwriting here was sharper, pressed into the paper harder than before. Cycle 27, Phase 2, incident with E2 during trial run of compound delta. Subject reacted adversely. Terminated test. Loss of viable material regrettable but necessary. Disposal completed according to protocol. I read the lines 3 times, my vision blurring. Loss of viable material. Disposal completed. He was writing about my son, our son, as though he were nothing more than a broken beaker or a spoiled batch of herbs. My breath caught, and I pushed back from the table so fast the chair legs scraped against the floor. I clutched the diary to my chest, willing myself not to believe what I'd just read. But the words were still there. And Dr. Nathaniel Cross's hand was steady. The entries after that grew colder, more detached. With Samuel gone, dear. Nathaniel Cross had turned all his focus to me. Adjusting compounds, increasing dosages, noting how my body adapted beyond expectation. The last entry was dated, well, I didn't know the exact year, but it was recent. E1 long-term effects promising. Recommend continuation upon return. Upon return. That meant he wasn't done. He'd left for some reason, perhaps to avoid suspicion, perhaps to continue his work elsewhere, but he'd planned to come back. And when he did, he meant to start again. I sat there for a long time. The only sounds the faint hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock. I realized my hands had gone numb from gripping the diary so hard. The house felt colder than before, the air heavier. I looked toward the front door, half expecting him to walk in, set down his coat and ask what I'd been reading. But he wasn't here. And for the first time I saw that as my only advantage. I needed to get out. Not just out of the house, but far enough away that if he came back, he wouldn't find me. But more than that, I needed to take this diary somewhere it could mean something. Somewhere his words could be turned against him. I closed it carefully, slipped it under my arm and stood. My knees wobbled, but I steadied myself. I didn't yet know how I'd get to town, or if I'd even make it before dark. But I knew this much. Dr. Bennett had stolen 5 years from me, and taken my son in the process. And I was going to make sure he never had the chance to do it again. I didn't mean to open the diary again that night. After reading enough to chill my bones, I tucked it under the blanket beside me in bed, telling myself I'd had enough for one day. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow in the corner seemed like it might suddenly shift into Dr. Nathaniel Cross's tall frame. So sometime past midnight, I switched on the bedside lamp and pulled the diary into my lap. If I was going to carry the weight of this book, I needed to know exactly what was inside it. No half-understanding, no pieces left out. The handwriting was steady all the way through. Even in the passages where I could feel his excitement, the ink pressed heavier into the page, the loops of his letters more forceful, it was still precise. It made my skin crawl, the thought of him recording these things about us in such a detached manner. The entries about Samuel began innocently enough. He too assisted in compound measurement. He too collected greenhouse samples without prompting. But they grew darker with each passing page. Cycle 27, Phase 1-2 expressing doubts about compound applications. Resistance to participation noted. Behavioral conditioning ineffective at this stage. I stopped there, my throat tightening. Behavioral conditioning? He'd never used words like that around me, but reading it now, I realized he'd probably been trying it on both of us all along. Little rules, subtle rewards, removing freedoms until obedience felt like the path of least resistance. The next entry was worse. Cycle 27, Phase 2 incident during administration of compound delta. E2 exhibited severe reaction. Seizures, vomiting, loss of consciousness. Immediate measures unsuccessful. Loss confirmed. Disposal completed according to protocol. Loss confirmed. I'd been bracing for those words since the moment I'd found the earlier non-compliant note, but they still hit like a physical blow. I pressed the heel of my hand to my mouth, trying not to make a sound. Dr. Nathaniel Cross hadn't just taken Samuel from me. He'd used him in the same cold, methodical way he'd used me, pushing until something broke. And when it did, my son was reduced to a line in a notebook. I forced myself to keep reading, though the words blurred. The following entries made no mention of grief, no hesitation, not even a pause in the work. Dr. Nathaniel Cross simply shifted his focus entirely to me. Cycle 27, Phase 3. Increased dosages for E1 to compensate for extended timeline. No notable organ failure. Mild cognitive degradation observed but within acceptable range. Cycle 27, Phase 4 subject, E1 entering prolonged unconscious state. Maintenance protocols established to ensure survival during absence. It was clear now. Dr. Nathaniel Cross had prepared for me to be alone in this house, suspended between life and death until he returned. He hadn't counted on me waking without him here. The last entry was the one that made my blood run cold. E1 long-term effects promising. Recommend continuation upon return. Anticipate breakthrough within 6 months of resumed protocol. 6 months. If I'd stayed in that bed another day, another week, maybe even just another hour, I might never have had the chance to touch this diary, let alone escape it. I sat there for a long while after finishing, the book heavy in my lap. I thought of Samuel's face at 16, the last summer before the changes became obvious. I thought of the letter I'd found by the door, his careful words urging me to hold on. He must have known. Must have been trying to find a way to get me out before Nathaniel Cross's work took me too. He'd failed. But I hadn't. Not yet. I closed the diary and wrapped it in an old cardigan, then stuffed it into the bottom of my bag. My hands shook as I moved through the house, gathering anything I might need. A flashlight, a scarf, my wallet from the drawer in the hall. The front door was stiff, as though it hadn't been opened in years. The night air hit me like a splash of water, sharp and cold. I stood there on the porch listening. The street was empty. No footsteps, no distant hum of a car. I stepped out, shutting the door behind me. I didn't have a plan beyond the first step. Get to the police. I didn't know how much of my story they believe, but I knew this. The diary wasn't just a record, it was evidence. Dates, observations, admissions of harm. Enough to put Dr. Nathaniel Cross behind bars for the rest of his life. Samuel hadn't survived. I had. And I wasn't going to waste the chance he never had. I pulled the scarf tighter around my neck and started walking toward town, each step heavier than the last. The bag thumped against my hip with the weight of the diary, a steady reminder of the truth I carried, and the justice I meant to see done. The walk to town took longer than I expected. My legs weren't what they'd been, and the years in bed had left me weak. The streets were still dark when I saw the glow of the police station ahead. A squat brick building with one flickering light over the door. Inside, the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper. A young officer at the front desk looked up from his paperwork. His eyes flicked over me. A pale, worn woman clutching a bag like it was the last solid thing in her life, and softened. "Ma'am? Can I help you?" I need to speak to whoever handles serious crimes," I said, my voice shaking. "Crimes against people." He hesitated. "Do you want to file a report?" I shook my head and pulled the diary from my bag, setting it on the counter. "No. I want to stop a man who's been doing this for decades. And I have proof." That got his attention. Within minutes, I was sitting in a small interview room with two detectives. A tall, sharp-eyed woman named Sergeant Helen Briggs and a broad-shouldered man with a kind face named Detective Carter. They asked me to start from the beginning, and so I did, but not with the fairground or even the wedding. "I woke up from a coma 2 days ago," I began, "and my husband wasn't there. I found this diary in the ceiling. Everything you need to know is in it." I slid the book across the table. Holloway opened it, reading silently for a moment before her eyebrows drew together. Carter leaned over to glance at the pages. "This is extremely detailed," he murmured. "These E1 and E2 references, that's you and my son, Samuel." My voice caught on his name. "He's gone. My husband killed him. It's in there." Holloway kept turning pages, her mouth tightening. "These aren't just notes. These are clinical logs. Experimental procedures on human subjects." "On me," I said. "And on my boy." They asked me to go through each section, clarifying what I remembered and what I'd only learned from the diary. Took hours. Sometimes I had to stop and breathe, the memories pressing too hard. But they didn't rush me. When I finished, Holloway closed the diary and met my eyes. "Mrs. Maxwell, this is enough to start a criminal investigation. But we'll need to find your husband." I gave them everything I knew. His colleagues, the labs he'd mentioned, the weekend trips with Samuel. They took notes, promised to start the search immediately. 3 days later, they called me back to the station. "We found him," Carter said as soon as I walked in. He was giving a guest lecture at the university in the city. Walked in like he didn't have a care in the world. I pictured him there, tall, composed, perhaps adjusting his glasses as he prepared to speak about advancements in botanical applications. I wondered if any of the students listening knew what he was capable of. "They waited until the Q&A session," Carter went on. Approached him in front of everyone. He didn't fight, didn't deny anything. Just looked irritated, like we'd interrupted something important. That sounded like Dr. Nathaniel Cross. Always more annoyed at a delay than concerned about the reason for it. They brought him back to our town to face the charges. I didn't go to the arraignment. I didn't need to see him in person again. But Carter told me later that Dr. Nathaniel Cross sat calmly in the dock, answering the judge's questions in clipped, polite sentences. When asked if he understood the charges, he simply said, "Yes." The trial took months. The prosecutors laid out the diary entries, one after another, each one matched with medical tests they'd run on me after my awakening. They found traces of compounds in my system that didn't exist in any approved medicine. They connected Dr. Nathaniel Cross to missing persons in other towns, assistants who'd vanished after working with him. The defense tried to paint him as a misunderstood genius, said his work was ahead of its time. But the jury didn't buy it. Not when they saw Samuel's name in the entries, followed by the words, "Loss confirmed." When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, I was sitting in my kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear. Carter's voice was steady. "Life in prison, Clara. Without parole." I didn't cry. I just sat there staring at the empty chair across from me, the one Samuel used to sit in. Dr. Nathaniel Cross would never sit there again. That night, I put the diary in a box in the attic. I didn't burn it. Part of me thought it should stay as a record, proof of what happened. But I didn't want to see it anymore. I wanted to live in a house where the only notes written were grocery lists and birthday cards. For the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of safety. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a start. 5 years have passed since the trial. I live now in a small house in Montana, tucked between rolling hills and fields that turn gold in summer. The neighbors wave from their porches, but they don't ask many questions. I think they sense I've had enough of explaining myself for one lifetime. My days are quiet. I rise with the sun, make tea, and tend to my garden. The soil here is rich and dark, and things grow easily. Rows of lavender and marigolds line the path to my door. In the back, I keep a patch of herbs, thyme, rosemary, mint. And yes, a few of the plants Dr. Nathaniel Cross once kept in his greenhouse. It surprises people when I tell them that. But I've learned something over these years. The plants weren't the evil. It was the hands that used them. In my care, they're just leaves and stems, meant for soup pots and sachets, not vials and needles. Every October, when the air sharpens and the leaves start to turn, I plant a small bed of white chrysanthemums in the corner of the yard. I tell the neighbors they're for the season, but they're really for Samuel. He'd have been a man now, maybe with a family of his own. I'll never know. But I can keep a place for him, blooming clean and bright against the frost. Sometimes I think about Dr. Nathaniel Cross in that prison cell. I wonder if he keeps a notebook still, charting the slow passage of days instead of heart rates and dosages. The thought used to make me angry. Now it only makes me tired. The truth is, I didn't win. Not really. Survival isn't victory. It's just the chance to keep going. But I've taken that chance. I've made it mine. On quiet evenings, I sit on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The air smells of the herbs drying in the kitchen, and the wind carries the sound of crickets. There's no ticking of a stopwatch, no scribble of a pen, no measured voice asking for my pulse. Just stillness. And in that stillness, I tell myself this. Some experiments end in discovery, some in disaster. Mine ended in justice and in a kind of life I never thought I'd get back. It's not the life I had before Dr. Nathaniel Cross, and it's not the life I dreamed of when Samuel was small. But it's mine and it's honest, and for the first time in decades it's free.